Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for this hands-on demo session with Exabeam UEBA. I'm Rick Kacha. I'm the CMO here at Exabeam. I'm joined by Anu Yamunan, who runs product management at Exabeam. We're going to spend the bulk of today's session on a live demo, but one thing we found that works better is if we cover a couple of introductory items first. So we're going to go through just a couple of slides to set the stage. Then we'll go to the demo for the bulk of it, and we'll be taking questions after the demo. You should have your GoToWebinar console up, and if you have any questions, just feel free to type those in, and we'll collect them and get to them at the end. So let's begin. So one of the main questions we hear from customers and from prospects who are evaluating Exabeam and UEBA in general is, how is Exabeam different from other UEBA products? And it can be confusing. There's lots of information floating around. We think there are actually three areas that are pretty unique around Exabeam, and I'll talk about those for a second. We'll make sure to show those in the demo as well. The first is most of the vendors focus on detection, and we'll show you how we do that. But we are the one product that has a deep focus on accelerating response, and really showing, we'll show in our demo how we can improve incident response in addition to threat detection. And this really pays off in terms of productivity for the SOC and the IR staff. So we'll show the response as well as detection. The second differentiator is we're the only UEBA product which, when we show timelines and we show behavior for a particular user or a machine, we're going to show all behavior, not just the bad, not just the anomalies, but the good and the bad. And really, even as users switch credentials, we put all of the good and bad into a complete timeline or attack chain. That means that your IR analysts can get better context. They can have a much more effective response. They're not just going to get a bunch of anomalies and try and figure out, hey, do these matter or not? And we'll show that in the demo. And the third thing is we put a great deal of work into making this product extremely easy to use, to make a lot of sense so that anyone in a SOC, the tier 1 analyst, the newest analyst on the team, can be just as effective with this product very quickly, just as effective as the ninja who's been around for a year. So it means for teams that are trying to hire in a tough environment, it makes it much easier to staff and hire. So we think these things are demonstrable in a POC and easy to show, and we're going to show each of these during the demo. There are some technical things we'll talk about as well. These are things like our session data framework, and I'll talk a bit about that, and we'll make sure you see how that appears in the product. There are some other unique things like our ability to uniquely and positively tie an IP address, a host machine, and a specific user identity together and show presence on that machine. We'll show that. We can create these automatic incident timelines. We'll show that. We're not going to rapidly deploy the product today, but we'll show you, some of the simplicity there. Some things to call out that we can't show today is the ability for a customer to extend this via content on their own. That means if you want to add a new use case, you want to bring in new feeds, you can do that through content, not code. That means you're not requiring Exabeam engineering to deliver you a patch. There's things you can do on your own. And we'll show how the system does some self-learning, can automatically classify assets, build dynamic peer groups, give results in sort of plain English language that anyone can understand. And we'll also show some of the integrated threat hunting capabilities of the product. So these are the kind of things that when you really dig in and watch, you can see very clearly how one product is different from the others. So let's just take a sec and talk about the session data framework and how it works. Why does it matter? So one of the things that a UEBA product does is it takes the pile of events sitting in a log system and stitches them together into some sort of coherent timeline. We call this a session, and we have a specific session object that we create inside the fabric of our product. And it really says from a login, a user login, to a user logout, what in a time-ordered fashion did that user do? That's useful. There's a couple things that we do that make it more useful. One of those, and we'll talk about it, is the good and bad. So you can see not only the anomalies in a session, but also normal behavior. The second one that's extremely important is When users share credentials or have multiple credentials and do activity with those credentials, the sessions can look very different. So for example, in my example here on the left, I've got Barbara Salazar. She logs in with her Windows domain account. She does some activity. Somewhere in the day, she uses the shared DB admin account to log into a database. She does some unrelated activity in the database, which may have some sensitive information in it. To an analyst looking at these two, these look like two completely unrelated sessions. With Exabeam, we're able to track those state changes in credentials or device or IP, and we see that this switch from the Barbara Salazar account to her shared DB admin account is actually the same person, and we can track that through a session. And we'll show you how this works in the product. What this means, when we look at sessions, we have a much more complete and coherent picture, and therefore we can evaluate unusual behavior and risk in a way you couldn't if you just had the unrelated things on the left. I talked a little bit about IP to host to identity mapping. We'll show this in the product too. Most security alerts, you just get an IP address. You might have a machine name, you might not. You may not have a username at all. But Exabeam is able to stitch these things together. And we know, for example, that Barbara logged into her PC as B. Salazar. She got this IP address, 10.10.1.2. She remotely logged in using an admin account to this other server 101, which has a different IP address, and she did some activity. Exabeam is unique among the UBA products to be able to tie this together and positively state that Barbara Salazar remotely logged in to server 101 as an admin on this particular date at this time, and this is the first time she's ever done it. So that ability to confidently attribute an activity to an identity and tie IP, host, and identity mapping together, even in a shared environment, is very valuable when you're trying to do incident response. We talk a lot about data science. We'll show some of these things in the product in a minute. Some of the ways we use data science are applied very specifically to the security domain. There's 4 called out here. One of those is we use data science to classify devices on the network. So we can do things like automatically determine, is a particular machine a workstation or a server? We can do things like naming in ranges and IP ranges and things like that to try and suss this out. But when we can automatically determine different types of hosts on the network, we can automatically apply different models to those. We can also do things like use data science to detect service accounts versus human accounts, normal accounts versus high privilege or privileged user accounts. We also use data science to figure out the de facto owners of systems. So for example, this allows us to do something like, hey, this particular person logged in to a workstation that belongs to the CFO, and this person who logged in is not the CFO. And maybe because of that, we can apply a different additional level of risk. So these are the kind of things that we'll show in the demo. We think these make the product extremely powerful, both from a detection standpoint and then from an incident response and timeline building standpoint as well. So with that, I'm going to pass this over to Anu. She's going to take you through the system in full. Anu?
Thank you, Rick. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Now, I'm going to switch over to our demo environment, which is a 12,000 user environment. And the day in the life of an analyst begins from our homepage. So what I'm showing you here is the Exabeam homepage. Like I mentioned, we are looking at 12,000 active users in the environment, around 50K entities or assets within the environment. The most prominent screen here is the notable users. These are risky users that have been identified by Exabeam. As you can see here, in the last week, Exabeam has identified 5 users as risky that have crossed a threshold of 90 or above. And if I switch back to last day, we are looking at 2 users that are deemed risky by Exabeam. I am going to walk through 3 major use cases, and I'm going to talk about some of the things that we see in customer environments as we go through the demo. But let's start with, I'm going to take Gary Hardin here as an example. Gary has been deemed risky, and he has a score of 130. If the analyst typically would go and start looking at what Gary Hardin did to see, why Exabeam has marked him as risky. So let's go look at Gary Hardin. What Exabeam does at the top of the page is we are showing you enough contextual information regarding Gary as to who he is. He's a software engineer, based out of Seattle. He's has May is his boss, manager, and his peer group that he's being evaluated against is engineering. And there can be multiple peer groups that Exabeam can evaluate based on the behavior of Gary. You can see clearly that he's got 2,000 other peers in his department, and he's the highest scorer in the organization. And you can, from an analyst perspective, you can quickly look through the risk profile of all the other users. This is information that we are pulling in from your HR system, like a Workday or an Active Directory, or any kind of an identity management system. And this gives the analyst at a glance view of what Gary is, who he is, kind of, provide an at a glance view. Now, quickly below, what we show is the risk profile of Gary over time. So as you can see, over the last week, his profile has been really, it's gone up to a notable on September 29th. Each data point here, each dot here on this screen represents the session that Rick was talking about earlier. So a session is the time that the user logs in to the time he logs out, all the activities stitched together, and the anomalies evaluated and the risk score assigned. So you can see as I go through this, his risk profile, the risk shot up on 9/29, and we found 13 different anomalies based on 21 events. He logged in from 2 different locations with a score of 130. And immediately the analyst would go below and see what type of risk Gary exposed during this day. And here it's ordered by the most risky first. So one thing I want to take a step back here is you can see that there are 14 different anomalies or 13 different anomalies that we found during his session. The first anomalous behavior is from his badge access. We saw that Gary logged in at 4:36 a.m. On Tuesday, and you can go and look at what his normal behavior looks like. So this is something that we are learning and we are modeling, and we are providing the analyst what his behavior looks like when his typical, the blue bars here show his typical session start time. This is the time that he typically enters into an environment. Similarly, you also see that he's logging on from his workstation around 4:41 a.m. That's anomalous. We also found that there was an alert that we got from Symantec, and we saw that there was a data exfiltration attempt from his laptop, and we got this alert from Symantec, and we are able to stitch it together back into Gary's session. We saw an endpoint alert saying that he's copied a lot of files. His average is, or his expected is around 1 million, or 1 gigs, but we've seen an abnormal volume of USB write. So as you go through, we are also looking at his abnormal access to apps. These are logs coming from GitHub or your application source code control repository. And again, you can see who are the typical users that access this application object. In Gary's case, he's never done it before. We are marking him as an abnormal user of this particular app object. So if you take a step back, we've identified all the anomalies, and more importantly, we are showing what is normal. If you look at all the different types of logs that we've assessed as part of Gary's session, we are looking at his badge access logs. We are looking at his Windows or VPN logs. We are getting security alerts from third-party products, whether it's Symantec, FireEye, or Palo Alto. We are looking at his endpoint logs, and we are looking at as application activity logs. So from what we are seeing customers do in terms of UEBA is that they are making sure that they are looking not only at access anomalies, they're also looking deeper into application anomalies. What are people walking away with? Is there a data exfiltration threat in my environment? Am I protecting my IP, whether that IP is in my file servers, in my PCI database servers, in my source code repository, whether it's GitHub or Perforce, and Exabeam is able to analyze all the logs, whether they're coming from a SIM or directly into Exabeam via syslog, and we are able to stitch together and show the anomalies for a single session for Gary. So from here, if you the analyst's perspective is to go and see a timeline of everything that Gary did. So you can go, the analyst would go and see the session, the complete picture of what Gary did during the day.
And Anu, let me just jump in here. We just had a question from Elizabeth of could we define a session? Maybe this is a good time when you show the session here to call out
Absolutely.
how it works.
Sounds good. Thanks, Elizabeth. So a session in Exabeam framework is the point at which a user logs in, and the user could log in via badge swipe. He could log in via logging into a workstation or a server. He could log in via a SaaS application. You could be logging into a Salesforce app and doing some activities that's corporate. So the session would begin based on an action by an user, whether the user is accessing a cloud app or badge swipe or log into a workstation, and it goes all the way to the time he logs out, whether it's logging out physically or swiping out physically, or a period of inactivity. So think of it as a typical workday of an active user in the environment. Another point I want to kind of reemphasize what Rick stated earlier is one of the competitive differentiators or one of the powerful features of Exabeam is the session data model and the fact that we track users as they switch credentials or as IP addresses change on the host, as they keep moving from one host to another. So I'm going to talk about the session data model more as I show Gary's session. So what you're seeing is Gary's activity on Tuesday, and he logged in from 4:36 all the way through 7:12 a.m. So as you can see, his session started because of a physical access. We got this event from a badge reader, and we see that we flagged two different anomalies. One of them is an abnormal physical access time. We have seen what Gary typically does and when he swipes in and what buildings he swipes in. And we saw an anomaly based on the time that he came into the office. And the second anomaly that we found was from the contextual information that we are getting from Workday. Gary Hardin gave notice, and we can use this as an additional risk element to monitor or scrutinize Gary.
And that description just comes out of the system automatically that you just showed?
That is correct. So this is information that we are pulling in from your HR system on a periodic basis, typically every day, and it shows up automatically in the system. That's correct. So moving on, you can see that, hey, he swiped into the building, and he also logged into his workstation. Again, it's an anomaly based on what typical patterns of session, when he logs into his workstation. Like Rick said, one of the powerful things of Exabeam is our risk scoring is not black box. We clearly show what is normal for a user so that the analyst can make up their mind as to what they need to do in terms of the next steps for investigation. Okay, so he also looks like he logged into source code control. In this case, we are monitoring or we are looking at logs from GitHub, which is typically a source code control repository. It can be, a repository that's typically used in financial, technology, retail spaces. So we are seeing his activity. He's pulling in source code at an abnormal time of repository objects that he's never touched before, or it's anomalous for him. Between 5 and 5:14 or 5:19, we saw a huge number of anomalies with different source code objects that Gary is pulling. And then he also logged onto a few systems that were not marked anomalous. Finally, we got an alert from Symantec saying we got an alert from his system where he is moving information to his USB device. And we are able to tie this alert based on the IP that we got the alert from, like Rick mentioned. And finally, when he logged out, we are able to see that there is an abnormal number of abnormal volume of bytes that got moved onto his USB device, and abnormal number of objects that he accessed. So this is a complete session of Gary, and this is assembled from a variety of logs, starting from physical access logs to your Windows logs, all the way to your application logs.
So that's actually a good point. Oliver sent in a question, where does Exabeam get the data for this? So where does it typically come from? Is it just logs in the system or logs in the SIM? Or?
So we get logs. If you have a repository already in place, whether it's your SIM, like a Splunk, QRadar, ArcSight, Nitro, or it could be a big data repository like a Hadoop cluster, And we also can get direct log feeds from your security vendors or from your Windows servers via syslog. So for us, we have a variety of ways where we get logs from. It can be your SIM or it can be directly via syslog ingestion. And we have customers that are doing both, a combination of either. Okay, so one more thing I want to point out before I move on to the next use case is, like I said, what Exabeam does is it builds the normal behavior of users, so you can clearly see Gary's workstation, what assets that he typically touches, which network zone he comes from, what countries he VPNs from, what time of the week that he comes in, and so forth. This is something that is provided at the fingertips of an analyst, so he can easily investigate instead of manually assembling information. Now let me go and show you another example. In this case, I'm going to pick Harvard. Similar to Gary, we see Harvard's risk profile shoot up over the day. We see that Howard is an account manager belonging to sales department. His risk score is 95 for the day. We saw an alert from Symantec. We saw him accessing a bunch of documents on SharePoint. The thing I want to emphasize in this case is that in addition to physical access, we see a lot of our customers are concerned about having a complete view of what users do in their environment from a detection perspective. Whether you are coming in physically, whether you are performing any data center activities, touching assets, performing database activities, performing file server activities, extracting source code control, but also what you do on your cloud, your SaaS applications, whether it's Office 365, Azure, Salesforce, Box. These are now hosting critical information, and Exabeam is able to fetch logs natively via APIs from these and assemble them back into user sessions. So in this case, you can see that Howard's SharePoint is hosted. It's on Office 365. We went and fetched the logs and analyzed these logs and saw anomalies in his behavior. We saw that he's accessed the application at an abnormal time. His abnormal number of objects in his session, his typical behavior is 5. And similarly, we saw anomalies associated with his actions. He's created a bunch of reports and deleted reports within a very short, within his single session. And on top, we are also pulling information from his HR saying that he gave notice. So this is another example where we are pulling in logs, not just related to what's happening within your data center, but also on your cloud application.
Hey, there's a question. What is the confidence score in the drill down?
Sure. Let me go back here. With any behavior modeling, we need to have certain level of information. All models are trained. So what Exabeam does is we go and look at historical logs, if there are historical logs, or moving forward, we can look at logs and build and train our models. So let me open up a single model that we have here. Let's look at session time, start time. Here, we are saying that we have a very established pattern. We have enough samples of Gary. If you look at statistical analysis, we need to have seen enough data points for us to build a baseline, and we also have to see a consistency of behavior, which is what is represented in the confidence factor. So we know that Gary has a very established pattern in terms of when he starts sessions. If I take another model, for example, we also know that for this particular object, KT energy markups, here are the users that typically touch this. So this is something that Exabeam is building. Just to give an example, concrete example, our typical baselining is anywhere between 30 to 60 days for us to train our models.
We do have one question that I want to take a second. A couple of questions came in, I think, off of Gary's around the endpoint stuff. And questions around, hey, do you have an endpoint agent? How did you get the USB information? I think in this particular example, that customer had semantic endpoint protection in place, if I understand correctly.
That is correct. So maybe this is a good point where I can talk about the breadth of use cases that Exabeam supports. So For us, again, one of Exabeam's differentiators is that our use cases are completely extensible via configuration alone without touching the product, which means that if we see a new set of use case, so for example, if we see a new badge access login in an environment or a new application that we do not currently support, this is all completely driven via configuration. But going back to the question, no, how do we look at endpoint logs, or no, do we have an agent? No, Exabeam does not have an agent. What we typically are looking at is endpoint logs that are typically collected in an environment, whether you have a Carbon Black running or a semantic endpoint protection product running or a McAfee product running. We are getting these logs either directly or through a SIM. Other logs that we are, that our customers typically bring in are your database access logs. These can be your native audit logs, captured by Oracle or SQL. And primarily the use case here is, these databases host very sensitive information. You want to make sure nobody's walking away with your IP, your customer information, your PCI information, and so forth. Similarly, other logs that we see in our customers that we are analyzing are file access logs. Again, this is probably where you keep your IP regarding new products, source code, and so forth. DLP logs is another source of information or for analysis within Exabeam. Application logs, where you have custom business applications, again, running something critical with in your environment. Proxy logs that show the amount of data uploaded to a website that is abnormal, talking to CNC servers, doing malicious activities based on web behavior. These are some of the logs that we can ingest. Like I said, from an Exabeam perspective, if there is a new use case that's all completely configuration driven without requiring a product change.
Also, a couple of questions came in about cloud, how we get cloud, and someone said, can you only get Office 365? It seems like we get some directly. We have our own connectors, and then some customers have a CASB in place to give us logs.
That's correct. So again, here we are very flexible in terms of how we get the logs. If customers already collect their cloud applications log in their SIM, we definitely can work with that. We have some customers that use a CASB vendor like a Netscope or a SkyHigh or an Elastica. We can work with those logs. What we also are seeing is that the cloud market from a logging perspective is in its infancy. So we have our own connectors that use the REST APIs that the cloud vendors provide. And we go and fetch those logs and incorporate those logs in our analysis. So as an example, the type of applications we support are Office 365, Google Apps, Salesforce, Box.com, Azure. We can go fetch those logs directly.
Thanks.
Okay. So another point I want to touch is, if you have certain users that are risky, maybe because they are your privileged users, you can go and add them into your watch list so that you always are keeping an eye on them, regardless of the risk I talked about, whether the insider threat is a phishing attack, or it's a rogue insider that with information are opening up the power of Exabeam Analytics to the analyst, where you are able to pivot on different types of information. So for example, I can go and query the engine for any account management, any privileged user activities that come in via VPN. And I say, show me everything, because this is of interest to me, show me everything that's happened that's around account creation, account management coming in via VPN. And I can run a query like that, and you'll get the results in a matter of seconds. If you were to do this without, in your current with your current technology stack, this is something that has to be manually assembled by a SOC analyst by running a variety of queries. And in most cases, Again, without the session data framework that Exabeam provides, it's almost impossible to put together something like this. So what I'm showing you is the results that matched anybody coming in via VPN and performing account management activities. You can see the list of users, what events they performed. The highest scorer was Shannon. You can see what anomalies she exhibited. She is the first, she's performing a VPN connection from Ireland for the first time, and she's doing some account management activities. I can also further drill down and say, hey, typically my account management activities should come from IT. Who in sales is doing this? And I can pivot on the data and then immediately say, show me everything that's from peer group sales. So you can see Valentin Daniel has performed these activities. You can quickly drill down into what he's done. I can also further drill down based on the event type. So for example, I can see, hey, who has logged themselves out on top of it. So with Threat Hunter, you're able to pivot on data and slice and dice the data. I want to give you another example. So like Rick mentioned, we are able to take in feeds from security products. Let me go and say, show me all alerts that Exabeam reviewed and assembled into the session. So show me everything that's got FireEye, MPS, and I find 3 user sessions that can what the relevant user score is. And why it's important is typically SOC teams are inundated with security alerts from a variety of products. With Exabeam, we are able to stitch it back to the user. And more importantly, we can present a complete timeline of everything that happened before the alert. So in this case, let me go back and click on the FireEye alert. You will jump to raise FireEye alert, and we got this event from FireEye. You can clearly see what he did before, what he did after, and whether it's risky and worthy of investigation further. Now, how do you prioritize and investigate these alerts coming from third party? Another thing that you can also do is, let me go back here. You can take a specific alert ID and search within Exabeam. And immediately jump to the session that the user had. Let me find one user that contained the alert. So here I have an alert ID from Semantic Exfiltration. I can go search, and it will immediately say, here's the user that was mapped to this alert and what his session risk score is. And this is something that from an analyst perspective improves their efficiency in which they perform incident investigations as well as prioritize what to look at first. Okay.
We've gotten a couple questions around data masking actually during your demo so far.
Oh, sounds good. So as we are seeing the UEBA space maturing, where we have SOC teams of 10 or more users managing the product with different functions and responsibilities. One of the things that is important in an enterprise environment is being able to segregate users that log into Exabeam based on what roles they have, what type of actions they can perform, and so forth. So from an Exabeam perspective, you can define different roles. For example, you can have an administrator role that performs administrative actions like setting up the system, setting up connections to your SIM servers, to your Active Directory, and so forth. You can have a tier 3 analyst. This is the type of user that would accept or whitelist sessions, set up watch lists, and so forth. You can have a tier 1 analyst, a junior analyst. Maybe the person can only view sessions, view activities, maybe, but cannot perform threat hunting and so forth. So what Exabeam provides with role-based access control is very granular control of how you manage your SOC operations, how you manage the responsibilities of different users within the team. One out-of-the-box role that we provide is a data privacy officer. what we see in the market is that there are more and more concerns regarding data privacy and what SOC analysts can view. Exabeam is able to mask PII information based on a configuration setting so that only users with a specific role, for example, in this case, the data privacy officer is the only role that can view unmasked PII information. All the roles within Exabeam are completely customizable. So for example, I can create a role saying my test role, and I can then assign this role what functions I need. While we provide out-of-the-box roles to help enterprise environments, come up to speed very quickly, you can completely disregard what Exabeam provides and customize your own roles. So for example, in this case, I want this user only to perform view activities. I want them to only add comments and not be able to view search library or perform basic searches or threat hunting or so forth, and save this role. In this case, if I go back, this is a user that has permission to view clear text data. So you can see that, he can see who the users are, what their pictures are. If I now disconnect and log in as a different user, this user is a tier 3 analyst, and he does not have the permissions to view clear text data. In this case, all the PII information, whether the username or even his profile picture, is all masked. So when as an analyst, as a tier 3 analyst or tier 1 analyst, when you go and look at this user's page, you can see the different types of risks that the user exposes, but you're not able to see who the real user behind the attack is. And maybe what we see our customers doing is that they segregate users into different roles. And if you feel that this is worthy of further investigation, you go get the approval of the data privacy officer and then unmask the information. So this is important when you have to meet strict data privacy guidelines, whether you have operations in places like Germany or you have concerns, just to make sure that your security operations team is not biased and you don't want them to view the real user, that you want them to have an unbiased view. We see customers doing both.
Great.
So that essentially concludes what I wanted to show today. Are there any questions, Rick?
Why don't we switch back to the PowerPoint? That was a great demo. I always love seeing this demo. Let's do this. So we've answered a bunch of questions. First of all, thanks, Anu. That was awesome. We've answered a bunch of questions the whole way through. There are a few that we didn't get to that we can get to now. So let's see. The first, and I'll give you a break for a few seconds. I'll take a couple. I've sorted them so the ones I can take, and then you can rest your voice for 30 seconds. Couple questions. One from Peter. What if I don't have a SIM in place? Yeah, we touched on this a little bit. A bunch of customers, while the majority of the customers have some sort of log management system in place, they don't all have one. Or what's becoming increasingly common, they're moving from one to a different one. They're migrating from an older one to a newer one. So we can't always rely on there being a pile of logs inside some sort of log management system. So in that case, it's perfectly acceptable to forward logs directly into Exabeam. We can do all our modeling and so forth on it. The main difference is going to be that if you have logs in a SIM or log management system already, we can perform historical analysis right away. So if you've got 90 days of data in there, we can do analytics, going back 90 days right away. If you're going to forward the logs to us and there's no log management system in the middle, then if you want us to do 30, 60, or 90 days of historical analytics, we need to wait 30, 60, or 90 days to pass so we can collect that data. But the functionality is all the same. It's just a matter of, can we look at historical data right off the bat or not? So, we work with all the main LMS systems. Another question here from Fanu. How long does it take to create the analytics once you install? Yeah, good question. This is one of the things, one of the points I put up early on was, fast deployment, easy deployment. Though we can't really demonstrate that here today. We're not going to install a system. But the system, once you plug it in, assuming we've got a pile of logs we can analyze, we'll reach out via the SIM API and start pulling logs over and running our, building our session objects, stitching the logs together into these coherent sessions, doing the analytics and building baselines. Depending on the data, maybe there's a lot of data, like 90, 120 days, and depending on the speed of the log management system, we've got some that are fast, some that aren't. That may take more or less time. In lots of cases, we start to see value the next day. In some cases, it may take a few days. But this is the thing where, the system starts to build its models fairly quickly. Okay, let's see, a couple more questions. Two of these are similar. One is, can we target or track phishing or spam? And the second one is, can we track and model web browsing behavior for bad IPs?
Sure. Let me take the first one, Rick. So the question was whether we can target phishing behavior. I talked about database logs, cloud access logs. One of the logs that we can analyze, whether it comes directly to Exabeam via syslog or we are fetching logs from a SIM or email logs. From email logs, we are able to, identify phishing type of behavior, again, based on behavioral science, based on data science. We are also able to see, users sending abnormal volumes of data than usual to their personal domain accounts, to competitive accounts, and so forth. And this, combining with what else they're doing on their endpoints or on their proxy, based on their web behavior, provides complete picture of what type of information is a user, exfiltrating, taking out, what type of risk are they presenting. From a web proxy perspective, we are able to identify, anomalies associated with domains that users are connecting to. Are there malicious domains? So we use a data science algorithm called DGA, or these are domains that are created by algorithms, and they typically are malicious, so they can indicate malicious behavior. So we can point out to users getting hacked by CNC servers, connecting to CNC servers, connecting to network connections that are not normal, connecting to IPs that are known bad IPs, we also take in threat intelligence feeds and use it as a contextual information, so that can be part of an analytics. So we combine both the email as well as web activity as part of the user session.
Great, thank you. Let's see, so we've got a bunch more questions coming in. Let's see, where was the one I just lost? What kind of alert, here we go. What alerting capabilities does Exabeam provide for high-risk behavior?
Sure. So we see Exabeam as fitting in as part of your overall security stack. One thing I did not mention as part of the demo is Exabeam can run as an app within your SIM systems. For example, we can run as an app within your Splunk or your QRadar. So from an analyst perspective, your workflow can start as before from a SIM. You can quickly go into Exabeam and get additional details for the user, session timeline, and so forth. But going back into incident notifications, let's assume that Exabeam has identified a few risky users. We can feed these back either via syslog or email or a combination back into your typical workflow, whether it's your incident management system, if you have a ticketing system like a ServiceNow or an orchestration product, or back into your SIM, we can send these incidents via syslog.
One, I'll let you handle the other, and these around, what are the options for deployment? Cloud, software, hardware, on-premise. At this point, all of the above. So we deliver Exabeam either as a VM, software virtual machine, or as an appliance where it's pre-installed. We have multiple sizes of appliances. It varies on the customer's desire. So in some cases, it turns out it's easier if the vendor provides provides the hardware and it's called an appliance, and it's easier for a security team to purchase and potentially bypass internal IT procurement. We can sell it as software, and you can deploy the software on your own machine. You can also run our VM in the cloud. We have customers who are running Exabeam in AWS, and it works perfectly fine. So pretty much all of the above. Now, a related question for you, Anu, is what kind of hardware, if you decide to use, this is what kind of hardware? So I'm assuming what kind of hardware do you need? If you're buying ours, we have a couple of sizes of appliances. If you're using your own and we're just taking our VM, you have to size it accordingly.
That's correct. So the way we would size an Exabeam hardware virtual appliance that Rick talked about earlier is based on the volume of data, number of users in the environment. Typically, the higher the number of users, you need to retain. You're looking at large set of logs and so forth. So we have a hardware option available. Again, 2 options based on the size of your environment. And if you want to deploy Exabeam in a cloud, your private cloud, or as a VM, we would provide the specs, and it's completely flexible.
Okay, a lot of other good questions. So can it automatically model based on any anomalous behavior? And say we have a custom app with 1,000 different workflows. Can Exabeam automatically model behavior there?
That is correct. So all our modeling here is unsupervised modeling. Typically, in a use case, we have a security research team that focuses on what are the important aspects to model within logs. But for us, from an Exabeam perspective, like I mentioned earlier, the sky is the limit. We are able to, whether it's your custom application logs, we are, with an understanding of the logs, we typically model everything completely unsupervised, and we are able to identify anomalous behaviors in them.
There's a question around how we work with DLP. There's functionality we can do on our own around protecting data loss, and there's functionality we can do if we're installed in conjunction with a third-party product like a Vontu or something else.
That's correct. Let me take, like you mentioned, there are 2 different use cases or 2 different things that Exabeam can provide from a value perspective. First point is, while we are looking at your application logs, your database logs, file logs, while we are analyzing and building them as part of sessions, we can identify abnormal behaviors when user is accessing records that's not normal to them. If a user is getting database records that's not normal, or downloading files that's not normal, sending emails that's not normal. So that's one type of data exfiltration that Exabeam automatically identifies and analyzes and assigns risk scores. The second type of intelligence that we provide is on top of an existing DLP product like a Symantec or a Vontu, or Symantec or a McAfee, where we are receiving logs from Symantec, where Symantec would alert on DLP, whether it's on endpoint or whether it's on web behavior or whether it's on email. One of the challenges with existing DLP products is the volume of false positives. Even here, Exabeam provides data science on top of the alerts and say, hey, is this a very common alert, or is this a rare alert within the organization? Maybe the analyst should investigate further. So we are able to get logs from both DLP and provide intelligence on top of it, as well as we are able to perform data exfiltration analytics on our own by assembling activities across a variety of logs, whether it's endpoint, email, database, file access, cloud access, web activity, and so forth.
Okay, 2 more questions. One is, what does a typical deployment look like? And by that, it says in terms of the activities required to set up the platform. So what does an install look like?
Yeah, so as an installation, I'll start off from a physical perspective, as in how many boxes do you typically need, and I also talk about the log feeds that a customer starts with. From a physical or virtual perspective, you typically are looking at a single appliance. Most customers, 90% of our customers start with just a single box, and then Exabeam is a clustered application. So if your needs grow and if you're bringing in more logs, you definitely can add more nodes for processing. From a management analyst perspective, it's all hidden, it's all transparent. They all look at a single user interface. In coming to logs, what are the logs I need to begin with? typically what we see is that customers kind of identify what use cases that are most important to them. Typically, it could be a compromised insider use case or a malicious insider use case, and then they go and figure out what is the most important, so they can start from there and then add more logs, more data sources as they go along. It's typically your Windows DC server logs, your VPN logs, maybe your security alerts is what I have seen most customers start with.
So then, last question tied to that is, so let's say we want to extend it. There's a couple of questions, I'm combining them into one. Let's say we want to extend it. We want to add a new model. We want to bring in new syslogs. How do we do it? Is professional services required? How do we do this?
That's a great question. So all of the ability to bring in new log feeds are available as an administrative function. We also have a customer success team that's, each customer that we have has an associated technical account manager. We typically do not have professional services to build use cases. These are either done with training on our side by the customers themselves, very straightforward, or we have our customer success teams that actually get hands-on and help the customers build these use cases. By the way, these are all out-of-the-box use cases. So all you need to do is say, here are the log sources that I want to point, and Exabeam from that point onwards starts building, modeling, and and analyzing these activities without really going and changing the system. So these are out-of-the-box rules. We are not in the business of building use cases per customer. This is something that's available to all customers.
Yeah, I think, let me clarify that. So two things. One, you said the customer success team will build these for you. I think one clarification is that's part of the subscription. That's
Correct.
Part of the, so we license this on a term basis on a subscription. As part of your subscription, all of those things, us building new parsers or new log parsers, that's part of it. It's not extra pro-serve charges. Second thing, when we do stuff, we do, as Anu said, we roll it out to the product. So when we build something new, it gets rolled out to everybody else as well. So for example, when we had a customer that wanted us to pull in badge reader logs and build those in, and we did that, that parser is available for everyone else too. So one of the great things about being part of the Exabeam community as a customer is as every customer uses this more and more, the parsers and rules and models flow back into the system, and everyone gains from that. From what we do for any customer, kind of rolls into everyone else.
Thanks, Jake.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're at the end of the hour, so let's have a couple of next steps. The first thing, thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks Anu for this awesome session. Within the next day or so, we will have a link to this recording. We're recording this, and you can watch it. I know it's probably going to be useful. Some of the questions that just came in were things like, hey, can you anonymize data in the system? Like, yeah, it's in the recording. You can go back and watch it. We have lots of information online at the website, exabeam.com/library. Has all kinds of data sheets. For example, there's a white paper on Exabeam and DLP that can support that earlier topic we had. If you want a custom demo, you can go to exabeam.com/product/demo, or pretty much anywhere on the Exabeam site and request a demo. We're happy to set up a live one for you. We do these webinars on a regular basis. If you have ideas for things you want to see in future ones, we'd love to hear it. They're fun to do, and we look forward to having you at the next one. So with that, thanks everyone. Have a great day. Anu, thanks a lot.
Thank you,
Hope
everyone.
to talk to everyone soon.